Yellowstone's brochures highlight geysers and rainbow pools, but they don't show the danger beneath the surface. The water can reach scalding temperatures that burn on contact. In this video, we uncover Yellowstone's most haunting hot spring incidents. Proof that the park's beauty conceals extreme peril. It was July 12, 1967, just before midnight, in Yellowstone National Park. The air was cool and still, the only light coming from a thin moon and the faint glow of steam drifting off thermal vents. The boardwalks and visitor paths were empty at that hour. But in the darkness, the dangers of the hot ground and near boiling pools were even harder to judge. Brian Parsons was 20 years old, visiting Yellowstone from New York with two close friends. He was outgoing, confident, and inclined to push limits, often trusting instinct over caution. His companions admired his adventurous streak, but they also worried about how far he would go when curiosity outweighed restraint. That night, the group found themselves near Nez Perce Creek, moving away from the beaten path. The ground was fragile, and in the shadows, it was impossible to clearly see where mineral crust ended and hot water began. At some point, Brian either leapt forward or lost his footing, plunging directly into a steaming pool. There was no moment of slow testing or preparation, just the sudden splash and an instant scream. The water was close to boiling. His body convulsed as he fought to climb out, but the edges were slick and brittle. His friends rushed in, but the heat and steam drove them back. One of them, Ronald May, made a desperate attempt to pull him free. In the process, he was severely burned himself, his hands and arms scalded as he tried to reach into the pool. The scene was chaos in the darkness. Parsons thrashing, May screaming in pain, and the acrid smell of sulfur and burned flesh thick in the air. With staggering effort, the others managed to haul Brian out. His skin had sloughed off in sheets, exposing raw muscle, and he lay writhing on the unstable ground. May collapsed nearby, his own burns agonizing, but less extensive. They shouted into the night until rangers were alerted and help arrived. Parsons was evacuated first to a park clinic, then airlifted to Salt Lake City for treatment. He survived for nearly 2 weeks, but his burns were too extensive. Infection and organ failure set in, and he died in hospital. Ronald May, though badly injured, eventually recovered after a long hospitalization, carrying scars from the attempt to save his friend. The incident shocked the park. Rangers redoubled their efforts to warn visitors, stressing the lethal risk of leaving designated trails, especially at night. For those who were there, it remained a grim memory of how quickly Yellowstone's beauty could turn into tragedy, and how one friend's instinct to rescue nearly claimed 2 lives. It was June 28, 1970, in Yellowstone National Park. The early summer morning was calm, the sky pale blue with only a few wisps of cloud. Steam rose steadily from the geothermal features that wound through the upper geyser basin. That morning, a family's vacation would end in a sudden, unthinkable tragedy. Andy Hecht, 9 years old, had traveled from Buffalo, New York, with his parents and older sister for a week-long family trip. His parents encouraged his interest in nature, enjoying watching him point out small animals or patterns in the rocks. Yet they struggled to rein in his boundless energy. For Andy, Yellowstone was a wonderland, each steam vent and hot spring a miniature adventure to examine closely. The upper geyser basin's features were beautiful but treacherous. Crested Pool, one of the area's prominent thermal springs, was a deep, churning body of nearly boiling water, its edges formed by fragile silica deposits. The crust around the spring could crumble under minimal weight, and the water beneath was well over 190 degrees Fahrenheit. In 1970, few barriers or warning signs existed, and visitors were expected to use caution. A single misstep could be catastrophic. That morning, the Hecht family paused near Crested Pool to admire its vibrant colors and rising steam. At one point, the boardwalk made a sharp turn with no guardrails or clear markers. Steam drifted low over the path, blurring the view ahead and making it hard to see where the walkway bent. Andy, captivated by the sight of the pool, simply kept walking straight, unaware he had stepped off the safe path. The silica crust beneath him was thin and unstable. Witnesses later recalled seeing him lose his footing. The fragile surface gave way beneath his weight, and he toppled forward. His parents' shouts came too late. He fell headfirst into Crested Pool, splashing violently as his small arms flailed in the scalding water. The boiling liquid hissed and churned around him, sending up a dense cloud of steam that made it hard for bystanders to see clearly. Adults rushed toward the edge, but the water's depth and the fragile perimeter kept anyone from reaching him safely. Other visitors watched helplessly as Andy's movements slowed. The surface of the pool bubbled and churned, but the boy was no longer visible. His parents leaned over the edge, straining to reach him, calling his name in desperation. The heat of the water was so intense that even brief contact could cause immediate, severe injury, making any rescue attempt from the pool's edge impossible. The steam carried the faint, acrid smell of mineral and heated water into the air as moments stretched unbearably. Park staff arrived within minutes, but the pool's depth and temperature made recovery unsafe. Rangers determined that no feasible method existed to retrieve him without risking additional lives. His parents were led away, overcome with shock, while other visitors stood in stunned silence. Crested Pool never released his remains. Rangers noted that the intense heat and chemical content of the spring would eventually dissolve organic matter completely. Andy Hecht's death devastated his family, leaving a permanent void and a haunting memory of a brief moment that changed everything. In response, the National Park Service added railings and warning signs around Crested Pool, fundamentally altering visitor interaction with the thermal features. It was July 20th, 1981, in Yellowstone National Park. The day was bright and warm, with scattered clouds drifting over the Firehole River. At Celestine Pool, the calm surface concealed water heated to over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. What began as a routine stop for photographs and sightseeing would end in a sudden, devastating accident that remains one of the park's most haunting tragedies. David Allen Kerwin, 24, was a California native traveling through Yellowstone with his close friend Ronald Ratliff. He was known for being adventurous, drawn to situations that tested limits, though his judgment often leaned toward impulsive decisions. Friends described him as generous and willing to put himself at risk for others, a quality that had earned him trust but also worry. He had no formal ties to outdoor organizations or sponsors, but he embraced a lifestyle of seeking experiences, preferring action over caution. The terrain around Celestine Pool was deceptively calm. Like other hot springs in the park, its mineral-crusted edges looked solid but could crumble under weight. The water was clear and blue, masking its deadly temperature of 202 degrees Fahrenheit. Park literature had long warned visitors about the hazards of stepping into or near the pools, but signage at the time was limited, and many underestimated the speed at which accidents could unfold. Even brief contact with water that hot could cause full-thickness burns within a second. That afternoon, Kerwin and Ratliff approached the pool with Ratliff's dog. Visitors nearby recalled seeing the dog wander too close to the edge. In an instant, it slipped into the steaming water, its yelps piercing the air. Panic set in among onlookers. The animal thrashed briefly, unable to climb out. Several bystanders shouted warnings not to attempt a rescue, knowing the temperature was unsurvivable. Kerwin hesitated only briefly, his instincts overriding the cautions. Despite the pleas, he ran to the edge and leapt into the pool feet first. The reaction was immediate and horrifying. Witnesses said the water erupted around him as he screamed in agony, thrashing for only seconds before struggling toward the edge. He never reached the dog, which was already sinking. With immense effort, he managed to climb out, his skin sloughing away in sheets. His voice broke as he collapsed onto the ground. His body burned almost beyond recognition. Bystanders rushed to help, some using blankets or clothing to cover him, though the damage was already catastrophic. Second and third degree burns covered nearly 100% of his body. Park staff arrived quickly, and he was transported for emergency treatment to a burn center in Salt Lake City. He survived for about 21 hours before succumbing to his injuries. Kerwin's final act was remembered as both brave and reckless, embodying his impulsive willingness to risk everything for another life. His attempt to save the dog became one of Yellowstone's most infamous tragedies. It was February 10, 1988, deep in the backcountry of Yellowstone National Park. Snow blanketed the landscape, muffling sound and hiding the dangers beneath. For John Mark Williams and his friends, the The winter outing was meant to be an escape from routine, but the fragile ground near Shoshone Geyser Basin carried risks few truly understood until it was too late. Williams, 24, worked as a cook at the Old Faithful Snow Lodge. Colleagues remembered him as steady and good-natured, often volunteering for long shifts during the park's demanding winter season. He had taken the job less out of career ambition than for the chance to live in Yellowstone, where he found freedom in skiing and hiking when not in the kitchen. Though not reckless, he had a habit of pushing boundaries when outdoors, confident that his familiarity with the area gave him an edge. Winter backcountry travel in Yellowstone concealed thin, geothermal crust, disguising pools of water that boiled far above safe temperatures. Even experienced rangers used caution, avoiding areas where steam seeped through the snowpack. A skier who strayed just a few feet off solid ground could break through to near boiling water below. The equipment Williams carried was typical: cross-country skis, poles, layered winter clothing, but none of it offered protection against the hazards hidden beneath the surface. That afternoon, Williams joined two friends for a ski tour near Shoshone Geyser Basin. The group sought quiet away from crowded trails, choosing an area known for its thermal features. It was more dangerous than usual because fresh snowfall had covered subtle signs of unstable ground. Park advisories warned travelers to stay on established routes, but they pressed ahead, believing their experience and caution would be enough. The air was cold and still, with faint clouds of vapor drifting across their path, hinting at unseen pools below. As evening settled over the geyser basin, Williams left camp alone, saying he wanted to walk and enjoy the springs. Snow fell lightly at first, but as darkness deepened, the storm grew heavier, obscuring the outlines of trees and vents. Around 7 p.m., his companions suddenly heard him screaming in the distance. Moments later, he stumbled back into camp, clothing soaked and steaming, crying out. His burns were immediately catastrophic, skin sloughing from his arms, torso, and legs. With second and third degree injuries covering nearly his entire body, his friends stripped off what clothing remained, slid him into a sleeping bag, and propped his feet to fight shock, trying desperately to keep him alive. Two of the group, Jack McConnell and Jill Fitterer, set off into the worsening blizzard to reach help. Jill was forced to stop and camp beneath a tree, while Jack pushed on through the night, eventually staggering into Old Faithful around 4 a.m. to raise the alarm. Rangers began organizing a rescue immediately, but the storm slowed their progress toward the camp. Through the long night, Williams remained conscious. His screams of pain carried through the storm for hours. By mid-morning, his breathing worsened as fluid filled his lungs. At 10:30 a.m., after thanking them one final time, he died. Rangers arrived at 11:26 a.m., just 90 minutes after his death. His injuries would have been fatal regardless, but the delay deepened the sense of futility among the group, who had fought all night to keep him alive. Co-workers at the Old Faithful Snow Lodge mourned him quietly, remembering him as a steady, good-natured presence during the winter season. The Park Service issued no sweeping reforms, but quietly reinforced its advisories, warning winter travelers that beneath the snow, Yellowstone's geothermal features remained as lethal as in summer. It was August 17, 1890, in Yellowstone National Park. The air was heavy with the smell of sulfur rising from steaming vents, and the ground shimmered with heat where thin mineral crusts coated the earth. Families wandered freely among the pools as railings and warning signs had yet to be installed. On that day, what began as a simple summer outing for a Montana family would become one of the earliest recorded tragedies in the park. James Joseph Stumbo was 7 years old, the second youngest in a family of 5 children. His father worked as a carpenter, and his mother managed their household, proud of raising their children in the newly settled lands of Montana Territory. James was energetic and curious, known in his family for his restlessness and tendency to dart ahead of the group. He was fascinated by the unusual landscapes they had heard about, springs that bubbled and steamed, pools colored with strange hues. The geothermal basin they entered that day was an unforgiving environment. Pools reached near boiling temperatures, the water laced with minerals that etched the earth. The crust around the features was often thin and brittle, resembling solid ground, but unable to bear much weight. Tourists in the late 1800s were allowed to wander close without restriction, guided only by their own judgment and verbal cautions from others. For children like James, the danger was hidden beneath a surface that looked deceptively firm. That afternoon, the Stumbo family stopped near a cluster of steaming pools. The parents were occupied with a younger child, and James, eager to explore, slipped a few paces ahead. Witnesses recalled him running along the edge of one pool, the ground coated with damp mineral crust. A bystander shouted a warning, but James either did not hear or ignored it, fixated on the shimmering water. The air was thick with steam, obscuring his footing. Moments later, his small shoe slid on the fragile crust. The ground gave way beneath him, and he plunged directly into the scalding pool. A shrill scream cut through the basin, drawing every nearby head. Adults rushed toward the edge, but were stopped short by the heat radiating from the water and the unstable ground that threatened to collapse further. Witnesses later described how James flailed for only seconds, his body thrashing in the boiling water before he slipped under. The intensity of the steam made it impossible for anyone to approach. His family stood only feet away, but could not reach him. Forced to watch as the boiling surface stilled, the sulfur smell mixed with an acrid, burning odor, leaving those present shaken and powerless. When soldiers from the nearby army post arrived, there was little they could do. The fragile crust prevented any direct recovery, and the searing temperatures left no hope of survival. James's parents were led away, distraught and silent. Remains were later retrieved with difficulty, the heat and chemicals having left them severely burned and incomplete. The family arranged a burial near their Montana home, the event leaving their community deeply unsettled. His death was among the earliest thermal fatalities documented in Yellowstone's records, marking the hidden dangers of the park's landscape. The incident was noted in early park reports, but prompted little immediate reform. At the time, visitors' safety was left largely to personal caution. It was September 14, 1905, in Yellowstone National Park. The late summer air carried a chill, and steam from the geyser basin drifted thickly across the landscape, blurring the ground and sky. Tourists moved cautiously among the pools, but barriers and warnings were minimal, leaving visitors to judge the risks for themselves. Fanny Weeks was 40 years old, visiting from Washington, D.C. She worked as a clerk in a federal office, a steady job that provided her the means to take what she described to friends as her trip of a lifetime. She was known for her determination and independence, having saved for years to afford the journey west. To her, Yellowstone represented both adventure and accomplishment, a rare chance to see a part of America that few from her circle back east had witnessed. At the time, Yellowstone was still developing its infrastructure. Paths through the Old Faithful area were worn trails rather than reinforced walkways, and the pools themselves appeared deceptively calm. The water looked like shimmering blue glass, but temperatures near the surface hovered near boiling. The crust surrounding many springs was fragile, coated with thin deposits of silica that could crumble under the wrong pressure. Tourists often wandered closer than was safe, with only verbal warnings passed along by guides or fellow visitors. On that September day, Fanny's group toured the geyser basin. The air was filled with the hiss of vents and the occasional burst of spray from nearby geysers. When they approached one steaming pool, Fanny stepped closer to the edge, remarking that she could manage safely. Witnesses later recalled that others called out for her to stay back, but she seemed determined to get a better view of the shifting colors beneath the water's surface. The ground where she stood was damp and uneven. As she leaned forward, her footing gave way. In an instant, she slipped waist-deep into the pool. A piercing scream erupted as the scalding water soaked through her clothing, blistering her skin immediately. Steam rose around her as she thrashed, arms flailing above the surface. Several men from her group rushed forward, grabbing her shoulders and arms. The heat radiating from the pool made every second excruciating. With effort, they dragged her back onto solid ground. Her lower body was soaked and burned, the skin red and blistered, sloughing away in patches. Witnesses described her writhing in agony, her screams carrying across the basin as onlookers struggled to render aid with jackets and cloths. There was no medical facility nearby, equipped to handle such an injury. Guides attempted makeshift treatment, cooling her with water from safer streams and wrapping her in what cloth they could find. Fanny remained conscious, moaning in pain as the burns began to swell and seep. She was transported with difficulty to the Old Faithful Inn, where a local physician attended her. The damage was catastrophic. Over the next weeks, blood poisoning set in, and her body failed under the strain of the burns. Despite efforts to ease her suffering, she lingered for nearly a month before succumbing. Her death was reported in newspapers across the country, described as a grim warning for careless visitors. Yet the park at that time made no significant structural changes. For many, Fanny became a name attached to the hidden dangers of Yellowstone's landscape. Her tragedy remembered, but not immediately acted upon. Thanks for watching. If these stories of nature's beauty suddenly claiming lives entertained you, click here for more.